Hello, welcome to the CYF course. Today we will start to dig in a hot topic, discipline and boundaries with kids. This is the first session and we'll have 4 of them. This is especially to address the topic of discipline inside the family, and my wife Joelle will speak about this in the setting of a Sunday school or another children's group where we have to have some kind of discipline to make sure that what we want to communicate can be passed on. So, discipline comes from disciple. Discipline is at the heart of discipleship. It's very much something that is on God's heart. Although David was a great king, he neglected this aspect of setting boundaries for his son Adonijah in his upbringing. His father, King David, had never disciplined him at any time, even by asking, "Why are you doing that?" The Hebrew word used here for discipline means to displease or offend. That means sometimes we need to displease our children when we confront them in their immaturity. We can even offend them sometimes. Eli is another example. We already spoke about that when we had this teaching about the parents as priests of their families. God told him, "Why do you give your sons more honor than you give me?" And later, he told the little Samuel, "I told him I want to punish his family, and I have warned him that judgment is coming upon his family forever, because his sons are blaspheming God and he hasn't disciplined them." These verses have challenged us greatly. By not disciplining our children, we honor them more than God, and there are consequences for that. The epistle to the Hebrews goes in the same direction. God is treating you as his own children. Who ever heard of a child who is never disciplined by its father? If God doesn't discipline you, as he does for all of his children, it means that you are illegitimate and are not really his children at all. And a little further on, "For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they know how. But God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in his holiness." Wow. So we see here the aim, the goal of discipline. Discipline is therefore an essential element that reflects the Father's love. And there is a great deal of confusion about this nowadays. In our society, authority is perceived as negative. There is a talk of positive, non-violent, caring and respectful education. And there is a lot of good stuff in these new approaches. The problem is that they are sometimes built in reaction to a negative, violent, punitive education from the past. We don't say it, but the terms used underlie it. We are moving from parental-centered education to child-centered education. So, come back to this topic of discipline and boundaries. Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." That's the basic Old Testament scripture about upbringing. And the key word is train up. We need to start when they are children, as soon as possible, because you cannot start with discipline when the children are teenagers, because they have taken already so many habits. It's very difficult to bring them back in the right direction. But with little children, you can train them from the start in having good habits in life. And the process is the following. We start with external motivation or boundaries. The parent is explaining what are the rules, what are the consequences, applying the consequence, so the child knows and learns about reality. If I do that, I reap that. If I don't do that, I reap that. And he's learning to link his action and the consequences. And this is so important. And by doing that, he's little by little internalizing his discipline. So hopefully, when he starts to be a preteen and a teenager, he starts to have internal motivation and internal boundaries. And he's able to stop himself, to restrain himself, to motivate himself to do some things, and doesn't need always some adults around to tell him what to do or what not to do. And that's a huge step. But that is not the end of our process. The last part would be following the hints of the Spirit in our heart that is bringing some impulse, and who speaks to us, do that, do that. And we are learning to be led by the Holy Spirit. And this is going beyond just the mere upbringing and discipline and boundary setting. So external boundaries are not wrong, especially when the children are young. But little by little, when they grow up, we need to encourage them to responsibility and to make room for them for their own initiative and motivation to be expressed. I remember in some camps we had a strange experience. Our participants were really good. They were praying when we asked them to pray. They were reading their Bible when we asked them to read the Bible. So everything was fine. They were well trained. And actually we don't want just kids who are well trained, who do what we ask them to do when we ask them to do it, but we want kids who have motivation to do some of this stuff even when we don't ask them to do it. So it's coming from their heart rather than just from the outside. And this heart motivation is something we need to train and to allow to grow in the life of the kid when he grows up. This is so important that it starts from the heart. So hopefully they will read their Bible even when it's not the time set by the parents, or when the leaders of the group say, now it's time to read their Bible. We hope they will read it also when they are by themselves, also with some friends, even when it's not in the schedule. So we want to see this heart motivation and these boundaries develop. If our training only depends on external boundaries, that would be a problem, especially when they grow up. We keep them in childhood actually, because they always need someone to make them do things or make them not do things. So how will they behave where we are no more around? This is so important that we let this inner motivation grow up. In the history of discipline, we see that through the ages, we went from one extreme to the next. For centuries, education was mainly legalistic. Legalistic means you must. The most important is your behavior. This is a poor relationship, poor in emotions and feelings. It's performance or result oriented. It may be harsh. There is a punishment if the child does not behave well, and it's an upbringing based on fear. The child is afraid of the consequence. So because of this fear, he will behave. For many of us, it seems logical. Yeah, it's what I've always known. But is it the way God is doing with us? Because what we want to emulate on earth is what we see in heaven. And God is not teaching us or discipling us based on fear. He's discipling us based on love. And some psychologists or pediatricians in the middle of the 20th century started to take the opposite side and say, no, we've been too hard with the children. We need to ask them how they feel. And it should be more relationship oriented and based on love. Authority is bad and destructive. The child needs room to express himself and be understood. Unfortunately, very often, many of these kids raised on these foundations are very much out of control. They become tyrants for the family, and actually inside they are very insecure. And there is much lack of respect for the parents. So this is what I call permissiveness. We allow the child to do a lot of things. Legalism on one side, permissiveness in the other side. And little by little, towards the years 1990s, some psychologists, they start to say, oh, but actually, to be built in his identity and to be secure, the child needs both. And we need to have an upbringing that is aiming at his heart, with an affective side where love is communicated and the child is secure in his parent acceptation and affirmation, lots of words and encouragement, but at the same time his bad behaviors and bad choices are confronted, and there is a norm, an aspect of norm that is given, and the child is able to integrate boundaries in his life because of this aspect of discipline. So we need to find another way, a third way, that aims at the heart of the child and through the relationship who can also build these boundaries. We could put it this way. Take this diagram. There is grace and no grace. And horizontally there is truth and no truth. And when these columns and lines cross, when there is no grace and no truth, there is chaos and hurts. And this is just the survival, and it's not even survival because there is a lot of distraction in the relationship. But when there is no grace and only truth, this is very legalistic. And this is an upbringing based on the result and the behavior. When there is grace and no truth, there is a lot of permissiveness. We call it grace actually, but this is not the biblical grace. This is a grace that allows the child to be wild and to do whatever he feels, as long as he can express himself. So we need to move further than that, and we need to put grace and truth together. And this is God's way of disciplining. This is God's way of putting boundaries. There is grace and there is truth. Grace and truth. But we need to learn to show grace first. Because grace is the foundation of our relationship with the Lord. And it should be the foundation of our relationship with our children. In John 1, verse 14 and 17, it is said that Jesus came and he was full of grace and truth. Jesus was the perfect expression of grace, but also the perfect expression of truth. But both times, grace comes first in the quotation. And this is very important. Grace needs to be first in the way we upbring our children. This is so important. Take the story of Jesus and the adultery woman. You remember this woman who was taken in adultery and brought to Jesus by the Pharisees, and all them, they told Jesus, we need to stone her. The law tells us to stone her. She's guilty. Actually, I wonder where was the man, because you cannot commit adultery just by yourself. But that was the woman that was guilty. And Jesus, he was just sitting on the ground and drawing with his finger. And finally he said, let the one who never sinned throw the first stone. And little by little, all of these people, they went away, starting with the older ones. So Jesus looked at the woman and said, woman, where are those who accused you? They are gone, Lord. So I do not condemn you, neither. Go and sin no more. And you see, in the way Jesus is approaching, the approach of Jesus is grace first. I show you love and acceptation. And when you are secure in this love, I still tell the truth. Go and sin no more. And this is important that in our parenting, we learn to show this grace and to put this foundation of unconditional love and grace, that our children, they know they are loved. And we make the difference between who they are and some of their action that needs to be confronted and disciplined. So this is important, that we start with this aspect of grace first. First, so, when we do discipline, we need to learn how to show grace. This is important. This is not something obvious or natural. Many of us in our families, we've never been really loved in a way that we feel secure in this love. So how do we show grace around us? And there were two writers, two psychologists, who wrote books that made a huge impact in the Christian world and even in the non-Christians. The first one, I think it was in the 70s and 80s, was Mr. Ross Campbell. And he wrote books like How to Really Love Your Child or How to Really Love Your Teenagers. And for him, to really love, so the child would feel that he is loved, it implies three aspects. The first one is appropriate physical touch. We need to touch our children in a proper way. We need to take them in our arms. We need to put our hands on their heads, on their shoulders, and we need to show them love. This is so important because physical touch is communicating something strong. Of course, there are different types of personalities, and some they really enjoy to be touched, and others they don't like so much. But still, touching communicates something very strong. Then, we need to have eye contact. Look at the one you are talking to. And when you speak to your child, look at him in the eyes. And when he's distracted and his mind is going everywhere and you try to speak to him, tell him, look me in my eyes. Look me in the eyes. And you speak to him. And there is an intensity through the eyes that is communicating something of the love of God. And this is so important. The third point would be focused attention. It's not so different, but we give really some time to our child. So let's take some time, half an hour, and we talk, and I look at you, and my body language communicates something to you. If every time your child wants to speak to you, you are watching the TV at the same time or reading your newspaper, what are you communicating really? You can say, but you don't remember what he told you. You need to be fully present when you take these moments with your children. Of course, it's not possible all the time, but we need to make sure that every day we have dedicated some time for focused attention. We really listen to them, and we make sure that we have all their attention, but we give them all our attention too. So this is Mr. Campbell. And in the 90s, we had another one. He's well known, and his name is Gary Chapman, and he wrote about the concept of the 5 languages of love. And this is something very precious also. All of us have a love language, and that means we tend to love others the way we like to be loved ourselves. So the language that speaks the most to us is most of the time the one we'll use for others. So what are they? Gifts. Offering gifts. Some of the children, when you give them a gift, it doesn't need to be expensive. It can be a very small stuff, but it shows to the kid, oh, dad or mom, they thought about me. Wow, a bottle of Coke or anything else. Something very simple that can sow in their life that they are loved. And acts of service. For some people, when you do something for them, that touch their heart. That means you really think about them and they are really important for you. The third one is quality time. Dr. Campbell already spoke about that. The fourth one is physical touch, and this one too. And the last one is words of affirmation. It's words that you speak to encourage and build up the other person. So all of us are more sensitive to one of these languages. For instance, for myself, I love words of affirmations. I'm sometimes still insecure, and when someone is really affirming me, encouraging me, and saying words about what I did or who I am, it really anchors something in me, and it's really valuable for me. But, you know, my wife says for boys and men, they usually have a 6th love language, and this is food. That's very interesting. When I want to have a good time with my wife, sometimes I cook for her. And for her, it's not so important what we eat. It's what we will talk about, it's the way we will talk. And I see that what I do to please her and to love her doesn't really speak to her. And I had to learn what was really important for her. And for her is more the quality time and the physical touch. So I had to learn this kind of thing and to speak the language of the other persons. And what is not easy is that every one of our children, they speak a different love language. So we need to learn their different language so we can speak to everyone. And this is very challenging, but this is also very helpful that people did research to see how we can communicate this foundation of unconditional love. And this is the basic. You cannot start to discipline before there is this foundation. And we'll speak more about that in the next session. Now let's put a few questions on the screen. You can get by groups of 2 or 3. Share about it, pray for one another. This is a moment to integrate what you have heard, to reflect on it, so it will take root in your hearts. May the Lord bless you as you share about that.